while ago I took a look at a plane from this company called Soba, which is an Indian company. Very cheap stuff. They actually manufacture for Axminster in the UK. They've got a range of planes, I think, called Rider, which they produce under some sort of license or labelling, brand labelling that they do for Axminster. But this is actually, I got this from a company called Kronos in the UK, and they seem to sell some of this Soba stuff with its own brand. Now this was extremely cheap for one of these double squares. I mean, typically one of these squares would set you back around, if this was a Starrett, it would set you back around about, I think, £60 or £70 for the 150mm square. The cheapest one of these I found previous to seeing this one was one from iGaging, which I think is about £20. But this was almost unbelievably £9. So you're immediately going to think this is terrible. But it's actually not that bad. There's a few sort of cosmetic issues with it. But I've done a few tests and it does seem to be completely square, as you'd want for a square. So yeah, just looking at it close up, the first issues that I've spotted with it is in the casting. This cast part, which you can kind of see. I mean, this is kind of nitpicking really, but if you're getting closely here and look here, you can see here this is just not very nicely done. I don't know what's happened here to the mould. Obviously this surface here is completely machined after it's come out of the mould, but it's left sort of some pretty jagged edges here. On the other side it doesn't seem to be too bad at the bottom, it looks kind of normal, but again here it's just all a bit kind of ragged really. But actually looking at the surfaces themselves and where it matters, these faces here are just absolutely glass smooth and completely flat. Whereas if you compare it to a combination square, this is a little Empire one that I bought, which I believe is a US brand. This is, I think the body here is some sort of aluminium, and this is steel, the ruler itself. But yeah, you can see here that the surfaces are just a lot kind of rougher, and it's a little bit of a less precise sort of setup, but more typical. I mean, if you're going to be using these for woodworking, that's typically more what you would buy. Whereas these double squares that a lot of woodworkers seem to be using now are actually more, I think, more of a machine tool kind of setup, really. And I think they're using them precisely because they are, a little bit more precise, so to speak. But yeah, it seems to be functionally pretty good. The registration key in here seems to settle in nicely. This slides across pretty well. There's nothing, I didn't have to do any sort of tweaking with a file or anything to get that to sit properly. It just seems to work really well. The tightening nut seems to work okay. There's a little spring behind it, if you can see there, which I think is supposed to aid with the tensioning. But I think it's quite slack and it doesn't seem to have that much of the intended effect on that. But it does tighten down okay, and it doesn't, if I tighten that, try and pull it apart, it doesn't come loose as it might do on a cheap one. Also, the main ruler is really nice. It's if you compare it again to this Empire one, the markings, the measurements, this is just all printed on here, screen printed out on, whatever. It's just a smooth surface to be subject to wear. Whereas on the Soba one, it's really quite nicely done. It's I don't know if you can hear. They've actually been engraved into it or etched in some way, and also coloured. There's some kind of ink being forced into the markings, but it goes down to. I don't really care much for the imperial measurements on it. I'd have preferred it if it was just all metric, but that wasn't really an option. On one side you've got millimetre increments, and on the other it goes down to 0.5 millimetre increments. which is quite unbelievable how they've managed to sort of etch that onto the surface, but they have, and I think it's 1/64 it goes down to on the yeah, you can see here on the imperial side, actually etched onto there. So it's quite well done, that, really. Not sure about this, whether this is hardened or not. I imagine it is. It sort of seems like that. I did drag a piece of hardened steel across it, and I couldn't kind of make an imprint on it. But yeah, so let's have a quick check to see if this thing is actually reasonably square. Again, I'm going to hold one of these plastic squares up to it. I got some criticism in another video for doing this, but this wasn't really intended to be you know, some exact check. It's not like doing the flip test, which I'll do in a minute. This is just, these are actually really accurate, these things. They have to be. And this is just a quick check, really, just to see if it is square, and I can't feel any slack in that, and I can't see any obvious gaps. It seems to be dead square, you know, and if I move it and replace it, again, it seems to be bang on. So let's just do the flip test. Okay, so I've brought the camera in a bit closer. There's a bit more light on this now, and we'll do the flip test. This is a straight, flat edge on this piece of plywood, and I'll make a cut with this marking knife, which has got a flat side, and then I'll flip it and see what the differences are. So I'll try and do this as carefully as I can. The flat side on here, I'm going to make a couple of cuts. Just an initial light cut, just so that I can make sure we're fully flat on there. Yeah, and then I'll flip it. Get this as close as I can, so that you can see any minor differences. Moved slightly at the end there, I think, so I might just have to ignore the end. But let's see if you can get close. See what we're looking at there. Now, I'd have to measure this. I will measure this. That's about as close as I can get with this camera. But to my eyes, that looks pretty good. There's no difference with those two lines. Okay. Checking against a light source here using this Axminster precision square, which I believe to be dead on. Just checking for any light bleed through, and I can't see any. Let's see if I can get that flusher. You know, it's pretty dead on accurate. So I did check the two marks that I put on this piece of plywood, and I couldn't detect any difference between the two lines. So for woodworking, I think, you know, this is going to be pretty accurate, as accurate as you can really get for, well, for what was it, £8.20 plus VAT. You can't go wrong, really. It's incredible, really, how they managed to actually manufacture it in India, ship it over here, and sell it for that. It's crazy, really. But yeah, if you really want something that's 100% reliable, then obviously that £70 or £80 Starrett is going to be the one to buy. But for the money, you just can't go wrong, really. I will put a link in the description to the Kronos site. It seems to be pretty reliable. I've ordered things from them before. They actually have a range of other sites as well. I think they've got one dedicated site just for Veritas tools. So yeah, worth checking out. I'll put that in the link in the description as well.